well. Okay, ji, Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Dear friends, today we are going to talk about the concept of two nation theory in Pakistani context. How and why the idea of two nation theory emerged in subcontinent, where the Hindus and Muslims and other minorities were living for centuries together. So, why Sir Syed Ahmed Khan and other leaders in the subcontinent, looked for separate homeland for the Muslims, and the why the this idea of two nation theory emerged. Secondly, there is perception that after 1971, the two nation theory was abolished. Sometimes these type of questions comes in written part, and sometimes they also ask you these type of tricky questions in the interview. So you need to understand all these issues. This topic is related to that. So this topic is related to Pakistan affairs, and this is another, you can say, topic which is going to be covered today, inshallah. Okay, let's get started with the historical background. The War of Independence, 1857. This war ended in disaster because of the, you can say, ill training and ill organization of the Muslims and the Hindus, of course, in the subcontinent, and the Brits. They were well organized, they were well equipped, and they had resources, and they also worked on the divide and rule concept, and ultimately they won against they curbed the mutiny, and they established their rule after 1857. Now, in this war of independence, almost 150,000 Indians, including Muslims and Hindus, and along with others, they were killed. Along with that, 6,000 Britishers, they were also killed. So ultimately, it ended with the victory of the Britishers. Okay, with the end of this war, the whole focus, the whole, you can say, agony and the anger of the British was against the Muslims, on the Muslims, and because they believed that the Muslims, they were, uh, at the forefront of the war of independence, whereas the Hindus, they were they equally participated in the war of independence, but later on, soon after this war, the Hindus assimilated themselves and they came closer to the British. They learned their language as well, and they became part and parcel of the British Empire later on. And the Muslims, they were totally sidelined. So after the defeat, the Hindus, they were part of the British Empire, became, and the whole blame was laid on the Muslims, and they were totally segregated, socially, politically, economically, even militarily. They were not given any proper place in the Indian subcontinent. So because of the vengeful policies of the British, the Muslims of India had become isolated in all sphere of life, as I told you before, economically, politically, socially, and they had no place in the military as well. They were not trusted by the Britishers. The Muslims of India were totally cornered, and they were sidelined after 1857 War of Independence. And that was the moment when there was, you can say, uh, idea of revitalization of the Muslims came in the mind of, Sir Ahmed Khan. So soon after 1857, the Muslims faced two problems mainly. First, it was the humiliation and subjugation by the Britishers, and second, it was the threat of dominance by the Hindu majority, because the Hindus were very powerful, and they were, having majority, and they were closely aligned with the Britishers. They were controlling the civil bureaucracy, economy, and politics side as well. So at that time, Syed Ahmed Khan took the lead, and he began his work for the revitalization of the Muslims of India, and he started working for them. And that was the, you can say, moment which brought Sir Syed Ahmed Khan on a situation when he realized this fact, that why the Muslims of subcontinent are lagging behind. And the core idea was behind that the education was the main issue which was putting the Muslims of subcontinent behind Hindus, and they were lagging behind in all sphere of life. And that was the only education, because the modern education was not there for the Muslims. And when the Britishers they took over, they totally abolished Persian, Farsi, and all these, Urdu and other languages, because they wanted to, promote their own culture and all their own language. So Syed Ahmed Khan took the lead, and he wrote pamphlets, and he wrote some essays, like for example, Loyal Mohammedans of India, in which he highlighted that why the Muslims of subcontinent revolted against the Britishers, and what were the reasons. He highlighted the atrocities of the British Empire, higher taxations and other things, which pushed the Muslims of subcontinent to revolt against the Britishers. So, in short, he tried to bridge the gap between the Britishers and the Muslims. And he also emphasized on the point that the Muslims of the subcontinent, Muslims and the Christians, they share a lot of things, and he tried to improve ties between the both societies. In order to improve the situation of the Muslims in subcontinent, he established many, you can say, educational institutions, and especially he established British India Association. Then he also established many journals. Scientific Society was established in Ghaziapur in 1863, and he also established some schools in Muradabad and Ghaziabad. And Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental School in Aligarh was the most important thing, which later on turned out to be Muslim Aligarh University, you can say. And most of the Muslim, leaders, they emerged from that particular institution. So Syed Ahmed Khan played a very important role in the revitalization of the Muslims of the subcontinent, and his idea was that Muslims should not take part in the politics of subcontinent at that time, because he wanted that Muslims should first of all get modern education, and after that they can compete with the Hindus and other you can say nationalities in the subcontinent, and only with education they can play a very constructive role. So what led Syed Ahmad Khan to work for the revitalization of the Muslims? Let's understand in the coming slides. So Syed Ahmad Khan realized that when the Congress was established in the 18th, in the last part of 18th century, so Syed Ahmad Khan believed that the Congress is solely the Hindu party, and they are not, going to, they are not going to work for the, Hindu Muslims of the subcontinent. So uh, he realized this fact after the Congress demand after 1857. Congress, when it was established, the first demand was political representation according to population. So obviously the Hindu population was in majority, and when the Congress, demanded this particular thing, automatically they demanded that the Hindus would control the politics of the subcontinent. So automatically the Muslims would remain as a minority, and they would be segregated more. Secondly, Congress also demanded the appointment in the government should be, by competitive examinations. So obviously, the Muslims were not good in modern education, especially English literature and other things. The Hindus assimilated themselves soon after the 1857 defeat, and they learned these modern subjects like physics and chemistry and all these things, English language particularly. But the Muslims were not that competitive in that area. So automatically, when the competitive examinations takes place in the subcontinent, automatically the Hindus would have, you know, grabbed all the important seats in the civil bureaucracy. So again, the Muslims would have been, in a very difficult situation. The third was the official language. The demand by the Congress was the Hindi should be replaced with the Urdu, and Hindi should be the official language of the of the subcontinent. So that was major, you can say, concern for the Muslims of the subcontinent, because Urdu, Persian, and these languages had a very closer you can say, affinity with the Muslims. So all these, demands were against the interest of the Muslims, and because of these demands, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan realized that this is, not going to help the Muslims of the subcontinent, and he should raise this, issue. And he raised this issue of the Muslims with the establishment of many educational institutions. And as I told you before, that one of the institution was Aligarh University, which was very important. From college, it was established as a university, and from there, the Aligarh movement started. And then you have seen that the most of the leaders of the Muslim League also emerged from the same institution. So it was established by the Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. After the death of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, the students from the Aligarh institutions, they established Muslim League, as we all know. And Muslim League was established just to raise the political voice of the Muslims in the subcontinent. And through this platform, they wanted to challenge the, hegemony of the Congress. And ultimately, this hegemony was challenged in the ultimately, which later on turned out to be, um, uh, independence for Pakistan. So Syed Ahmed Khan was against the political activities of the Muslims. Why he was against the political activities of the Muslims? Because he knew that without education and modern, education, Muslims, they would not be able to compete with the Congress. And so this was the reason that he initially asked the Muslims to acquire modern language, education, and then compete with the Congress. So his idea, that idea clicked, and the educational institution which he started, these institutions provided the Muslims of subcontinent a platform to learn. And ultimately, after learning and after, getting the modern education, they were able to establish Muslim League. And ultimately, the Muslim League, became a very important, you can say, cornerstone of Muslims. And this particular league actually promoted the idea of, two nation theory. So the idea of two nation theory, let's first of all understand the concept of two nation theory. Two nation theory is an ideology of the religious nationalism which significantly influenced the Indian subcontinent, Muslims of the Indian subcontinent, because they felt segregated after the 1857, War of Independence, and the Hindus were trying to marginalize them. The Britishers were subjugating them. So this idea was emerged, and during that period. So, according to two nation theory, Muslims and Hindus are two separate nations with their different custom, religion, and traditions, of course. So their social life is different. Their heroes are different. Their history is different. So therefore, from the social and moral point of view, the Muslims of India should be able to have their own separate homeland outside of Hindu majority India, in which Islam is the dominant religion and where they are not facing any subjugation by the majority, like, for example, the Indian Hindus. There are varying interpretations of two nation theory based on whether the two postulated nationalities can coexist in one territory or not, with radically different implications. One interpretation argued for the secession of Muslim majority areas of colonial India and saw differences between Hindus and Muslims as irreconcilable. So ultimately the idea was that the Muslim majority areas must be separated from the colonial India. And this interpretation, nevertheless, promised a democratic state where Muslims and non-Muslims would be treated equally. But this was just a dream, because in India, where as I told you before, we discussed in the previous lecture as well, that Qaeda Muhammad Ali Jinnah was proponent of Hindu-Muslim unity, and he wanted a united India where the Muslims of the subcontinent would have equal rights. So this was the country Qaidism always demanded. But after 1937 elections, which we covered in the previous lecture, the Congress was exposed. And then Qaidism Muhammad Ali Jinnah realized, ultimately, and the other leaders, of course, like Allama Iqbal and the others also realized, in the Allahabad, in 1930, that ultimate, solution of Muslims in the subcontinent is a separate homeland, and based on their, religion and past. and everything. So a different interpretation holds that a transfer of populations, the total removal of Hindus from Muslim majority areas, and total removal of Muslims from the Hindu majority areas. So is a desirable step towards a complete separation of two incompatible nations that cannot coexist in harmonious relationships. So this was the idea behind which we ultimately, materialized in 1947, in which Muslim majority areas went to Pakistan, and then the Hindu majority areas were made the Hindustan. So, what other factors contributed to the two nation theory? Before, so let's understand first of all, after 1990, 1920 to 1946, there were, widespread communal violence. And because of that communal violence, you can analyze that, from 1920 to 1946, there were, many incidents of, incidents of Hindu and Muslim clashes, in which thousands of people were killed. So, which proves that these two nations, they cannot live together, and ultimately there must be, a separate homeland for these two nations, because of these communal violence, and because of their, ultimately their belief system, and their history. They cannot live together. Their customs, their traditions, everything was different from each other, and which led to the violence. So this was one of the factor which contributed, and which pushed the Muslim leaders to go for, to push for, two nation theory. As we also discussed in the previous lecture as well, this was another, factor which, exposed the Hindu mentality in subcontinent, and that was a Nehru report. And we have already discussed in the previous lecture, in which the Hindus, Nehru, and Nehru's Congress, they demanded for, Hindu dominance, Hindu dominance in electorate, Hindu dominance in language, Hindu dominance in the provincial, autonomy. So they actually wanted to be dominant, and which was not, of course, which was not acceptable for the Muslims. And that was the reason that Qaeda-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah came up with 14 points, which we discussed in the previous lecture. Then in 1930, Lama Iqbal, he came up with the idea that Hindus and Muslims, ultimate their final destiny would be a separate homeland. But at that time, he did not coin the, Pakistan, Pakistan as a state, but he gave the idea that, keeping in view the Hindu dominance in subcontinent, ultimately the final destiny would be, India's Muslims should be to consolidate a northwest Indian Muslim state where the Muslim majority areas lie, including Kashmir, Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan, and NWFP at that time. So these were the, this was the background which contributed towards the two nation theory. Another major factor which people ignore, which seriously, push the Muslims of the subcontinent to, think for their own homeland and think for the Muslim, identity, and that was the Hindutva. Hindutuva ideology, actually, and it was there for centuries. But in 1923, Sarwakar published a book, Hindutuva, Who is a Hindu, and discussed the history and need of self-defense for the Hindu nation. He believed that the Hindus, they are, the Hindustan, this region, India, it belongs to Hindus only, and any other nationality in this region, whether they are Muslims, Christians, Jains, Buddhists, or any other, they are foreigners, and they, they should be kicked out from this region. So ultimately, in 1925, the followers of the Hindutva established RSS, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. This was an extremist organization which believed in a separate homeland. You can say a dominant, power for the Hindus of the subcontinent, and they believed they wanted to establish a Hindu Rashtra, Hindu state, in which, no other minority is allowed to live. After 25 and just before the independence, the RSS leaders Keshav Bali and Hajwar, And Golwalkar emphasized on the point that India is a Hindu nation, and this actually contributed in the contributed in the two nation theory, and it actually ignited this fire in the minds of the Muslim, that Muslims should get their own separate homeland and avoid being minority in Hindu dominated society. So the Sarwakar says India must be a Hindu land reserved for the Hindus, and he said that Hindus should be master in their own house. Hindustan, the land of Hindus. So this was the actually assertion which they made, and because of their extremist ideology, it was really a threat for the Muslims. According to Sarwakar, a Hindu is one who regards this land as Bharat-Varsha, from the Indus to seas, as his fatherland, and as well as his holy land, that is the cradle land of his religion. So basically, uh, this particular ideology believed in the total dominance of the Hinduism and Hinduism in the Indian subcontinent, and they believed, there are three prerequisites for the Hindutuva. One is common nation, Rashtra. Second is common civilization, Sanskriti, and third is common race, Jati. And they believe that all these three things, if are there in the that particular society, and that society is actually based on Hindutva ideology. The proponents of Hindutva believed that India, Hindustan, belongs to Hindus only, and there is no place for other religious minorities and ethnicities. So this is very extreme position. In RSS consider Hindustan is predominantly a Hindu nation because 85% of the population is Hindu, and the remaining are non-Hindus, and they should not be allowed to live. There could be another option which they considered, and that was Ghar Chalo program, in which they wanted that the all these Christians and the Muslims, they must revert back to Hinduism, which was which is still going on there in India right now. Ghar Chalo program ke andar they are now forcefully they are trying to convert people from Hinduism to Hinduism, sorry, from Muslims to Hinduism, and from Christianity to Hinduism. Hindutva, the proponents of Hindutva also believed that after 47 they not only got independence from a 200 years rule of colonial power British, but also from the 700 years of non-Hindu rule, especially by the Muslims. So this extreme ideology was a threat for the Muslims of the subcontinent, and it was inevitable for the Muslims of the subcontinent to find a separate homeland. So there was no point of living in India with Hindus because their ideology was too crude. The ideology of Hindutva, Gwalkar became the leader of RSS in 1940. And if you remember, in the 1940, at the same time, Pakistan resolution was also passed. So it was going parallel. Qaeda-Azam and other Muslim leaders in the subcontinent, they realized this fact that Hindutva is emerging, and they are, they are establishing themselves. But Nehru was not a part of Hindutva, but at the same time, his ideology was, predominantly that Hindu or Hindus must be dominant in the Indian subcontinent. According to Golwalkar, in his work, "We or Our Nationhood" represents the idea of Hindu nation in these words. For example, he says, the foreign races in Hindustan must either adopt the Hindu culture and language, must learn to respect and hold in reverence Hindu religion, must entertain no ideas but those of glorification of the Hindu race and culture, or may stay in the country wholly subordinated to the Hindu nation, claiming nothing, deserving no privileges, no civil rights. So this is the idea behind Hindutva. Now understand this thing, keeping in view this ideology, how could the Muslims of the subcontinent could live with the Hindus in the subcontinent? It was not possible. Since then, RSS has been the main proponent of Hindutva ideology, and most of the BJP leaders who are now controlling the politics in India, they have already, always been part of the RSS. And basically, this Modi, he was part of, he joined BJP, and he used to organize the rallies of the, LK Advani and other senior leaders like Bajpayee, who were heavily influenced by the uh, Hindutva ideology. So today, Modi, there, his party, RSS, indirectly they are controlling the politics in India, and which is very dangerous. RSS wanted to Hinduize India, in which they have been successful right now, and they are trying to control the things. They won elections twice in India, and slowly and gradually they are improving themselves. Initially, in the initial period, the RSS established a paramilitary wing which called Shakas, and at that time their strength was small, but now it has become very huge paramilitary force. We'll discuss in the coming slides. This group was involved in the communal violence and actively involved in the community building in Hindu society, so they can defend themselves from Muslims, Christians, communist, and materialistic influences. So this is what they have been doing. And as I told you before in the previous slide as well, that they were involved in heinous crimes. Most of the communal violence was carried out by these people. And in the modern history, you can see the Gujarat riots, Malegaon, and many other places in which they carried out, brutal acts against the Muslims and Sikhs and other, minorities in the area. During 1943 to 1948, the RSS number grew exponentially from 76,000 to 600,000. Now, this is the period in which the Pakistan was, established, and this was very crucial period for the growth of RSS. And slowly and gradually they consolidated themselves. The assassination of Gandhi by a RSS member, Godse, played havoc for the RSS, in India initially in the initial period. RSS was involved; their member was involved in the killing of Gandhi. This was the picture of Godse, and he killed Gandhi. Why? Because he had a soft corner for the Muslims of the subcontinent. He wanted that the Congress must give the Muslims of the subcontinent, like Pakistan, for example, must give Pakistan with their due share. And this was the his mistake, and he was killed by RSS leader. Later on, RSS was banned for temporarily, and their 20,000 RSS members were captured. They were behind bars. But after 1951, the ban was again lifted, because you cannot ban a Hindu party, which is which is a predominant religion in India. So after 51, they changed their face, and they established Bharatiya Jan Sangh, which was later on turned into be BJP after a few years. So this was their political face to hide their extremist face, Bharatiya Jan Sangh. And after that, they slowly and gradually encroached into the Hindu society. And today they are well established. Hindutuva organizations, they are also called as Sangh Parivar. And all these organizations, there are many, hundreds of them, but they are the dominant, these are the dominant, you can say parties who are well connected with the Hindutva ideology, and they are very, very dangerous. They are very, very influential. And these, if you analyze today in modern times, Hindus, they are 80% of the Hindu India population, and all Muslims are only 14% in the Indian subcontinent in India in modern times. If you analyze today, the Indian population in 2021 is about 1.39 billion, and out of 1.39 billion, 966 million are Hindus, and Muslims are close to 200 million. But still they are minority. The Muslims are minority in India, and the Hindus, with 966 million population, they control the politics, they control the military, they control intelligence, they control internal affairs and everything. So no minority in India today can live without the influence of the Hindus in India right now. And today the Hindutva party, BJP, is controlling things, and things are getting worse, and it has now established the Muslims, that the Qaeda Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Syed Ahmed Khan, Allama Iqbal, and many other leaders, they were right, and to establish a separate homeland for the Muslims. This is going to